Hi, and welcome to the 99th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston. I'm struggling with counting up to 99, as you can see. I'm the original inventor of TiddlyWiki, and today I'm joined by, from left to right on my screen, Hegart. Hegart, would you like to say hello, introduce yourself, give your name, say where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki, and obviously we'll be coming back to that, so just a brief introduction for now.
Yeah, kia ora tātou. My name is Hegart. I'm from Auckland, New Zealand, and I've been playing around with TiddlyWiki since about September last year. At the start of this year, I joined with the DesignWrite course with Professor Steve Schneider and the State University of New York. And I've come along in leaps and bounds with my TiddlyWiki experience since then. I've recently started my semester project, which is called Tiddly CRM, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot more to be able to do that.
Indeed, indeed. It's great to have you here, Hegart. Glad you're able to join us at a hangout. Next, Nathan Kane. Hello. Oh, you are microphoned. Hello.
Yes,
How are
sir.
you? Would you like to introduce yourself in the usual way?
Yes, I'm Nathan Kane, a developer from the United States, working with TiddlyWiki in that capacity for a couple of years now, and developing a couple of different applications, small websites and such, and my girlfriend as well is developing actually now 7 or 8 small websites using TiddlyWiki as a CMS system. And growing her team. She just got a couple new employees that are just this week getting their first exposure to TiddlyWiki, and that's been kind of awesome. Some of them have taken to it immediately and been blown away and amazed by its capabilities, and some of them are pulling their hair out. So been very interesting. So
that probably echoes what we find with the students on the course that Hegart is on. Thank you, Nathan. I'm delighted you could join us. Paul, hello. Welcome back, in fact. Would you like to introduce yourself in the time-honored way, please?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Hi, I'm Paul Reiber. I've been working with Unix and Linux and the Internet since it started, more or less, and heavily involved with cloud technologies at the moment and such, taking care of customers. Ran into TiddlyWiki when it first started. Prior to TiddlyWiki, I had consumed the entire JavaScript, ECMAScript specification. Saw JavaScript as something that was going to be compelling and world-changing, and saw TiddlyWiki as one of the first major steps along that path, in that it provides internal management for data. So standard, create, read, update, delete types of data operations are pretty untenable inside of a web page, other than with something like TiddlyWiki. So it's compelling from the get-go, and helped a friend of mine get involved with TiddlyWiki as well, who some of you guys might know, Eric Shulman. And it's just been a fun ride. It really has. Pardon me?
You introduced Eric to TiddlyWiki.
To TiddlyWiki, yeah. Eric and I have known each other since Carnegie Mellon, some couple decades ago, more decades ago than we should probably admit, and so we've been fast friends for years and years. And when I saw TiddlyWiki and I saw what was going on with it in its early stages, it really needed a UI designer like nobody's business. So just being honest. And my friend Eric is he's the guy that invented the combo box when he was working at Lotus. He combined together the idea of having a drop-down menu that you could click on, and it would drop down a menu, but you could also change the item that was right on the top and add that to the menu. Which is what a combo box does. It lets you add items to a list. And so he came up with that idea in terms of trying to save some screen real estate for Lotus 123. And he's just been doing a lot of very cool things with UIs ever since. I mean, it's been his entire career. So when I saw what TiddlyWiki was all about and the potential and the malleability there, And I saw what he was looked at what he was up to, and I said, no, just take a look at this and see how it resonates with you. And he balked at first, as Eric always does. He said, no, that's a bad idea at first. But he looked at it a little bit later. He decided he was going to take a look, and now he's in feet first.
Well, Paul, great, glad that you could join us. Finally, Atul, hiya. Would you like to say hello, introduce yourself, say where you're from, and something about your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Yeah, hi, my name is Atul. I am from Chandigarh, India. I have been very keenly looking at TiddlyWiki for almost a couple of years now. There is a lot of scope I see in its application to what we are trying to do here in India, especially regarding education and skill development. I have translated the TiddlyWiki into Punjabi and Hindi, and I'm planning a few more Indian languages. Also, we're looking forward for Federation, a lot of fun things.
Indeed. Great that you could join us, Atul. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. So, as before, there's a TiddlyWiki online that I've been maintaining over the last few weeks with links and items for the agenda today. And the URL is hangout-99.tiddlyspot.com. So let me screen share, and we'll just have a quick look. So hopefully you can see the screen here. So I wanted to very quickly cover a question that's cropped up in the groups about the future of TiddlyDesktop, to demo an important new feature for the next version of TiddlyWiki, which is the rich text editor. And I think, in fact, and then the discussion about DesignWrite, and then those three remaining items are kind of backlog items that we will discuss if we have time. So the plan is to do a quite an extended discussion about the DesignWrite course, partly because we've got Hegart here, who's been part of the intake of the current course that's still going on this semester, and partly because the course kicks off again in May of next year. So, sorry, April? May of this year. I'm so sorry.
Yes, indeed, May of this year, that's right.
So in 2 months or something. So this is a great time to sign up for the course, and I hope when you hear what Hegart has to say about it, I hope you'll all agree that it's a good use of time and fun and instructive experience. So before we do that, just talking very briefly about TiddlyDesktop. So I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about this. I think we have actually talked about it before, but it's important because this is something that's going to have an impact on the way that people use TiddlyWiki. So the situation for some time, I think 2 years now, is we've had this application, TiddlyDesktop, that is a custom web browser that's designed from the ground up to run TiddlyWiki, which sounds an amazing thing. And it's possible because these days browsers have been kind of componentized. So as a developer, you can pick up the bits of the inside of a browser and reassemble them into something slightly different. So now if I screen share, I'll just show you the current state of TiddlyDesktop. I'm sharing my whole desktop, which might be a bit confusing. But hopefully you can see there's a window here that lists all of my wikis. It lists both wiki files, so individual standalone TiddlyWiki HTML files, and wiki folders, which is to say TiddlyWikis that have been exploded into one file per tiddler, as we do under Node.js. And if I open the wiki, it opens in a new window. Only I think it doesn't, because I think that file's missing, actually. Okay, so that's a really frustrating. Let me just rerun it. And we'll try an example that... Okay, so I think that wiki is there. Okay, so here's a TiddlyWiki in in a TiddlyDesktop custom browser window. So you can see that one of its attractions is it's very minimalistic. There is just the normal OS 10 title bar, and then it's a TiddlyWiki. And if I do something like add a new tiddler, you'll see up here that it immediately says saved wiki. If I close the wiki and reopen it again, then look in recent, you can see that my changes are there. So it's the functionality that we're used to with TiddlyFox, in fact, but arranged in a slightly different way. Those things are pretty much bookmarks to TiddlyWikis that I can click on to open that TiddlyWiki. So I was quite pleased with TiddlyDesktop when it first came out. It seemed as though it might be an interesting answer to a kind of a problem, which is that it's a bit of a bore trying to make TiddlyFox work well. And we have much more control in an environment like TiddlyDesktop. But what's actually happened is almost all of the feedback from the enthusiastic users of TiddlyDesktop has been essentially requests to make it a better browser. So, or indeed, to make it have the basic features of ordinary browsers. So we repeatedly have had people asking for page zoom, spell check, find in page. I actually I've listed in the wiki a link to a sort of filter on GitHub that shows the 7 currently open issues that essentially are all aspects of making TiddlyDesktop a better browser. Now the trouble with that is that that's not really a very good use of my time. So duplicating features that have already been lovingly implemented in many cases by all of the major desktop browsers, there's not much incentive to re-implement those. And you know, although each of the features I mentioned, well, some of them are quite simple, like page zoom, they all require a bit of care and attention to implement them in an effective way. So for the last year or so, I have been concerned that my work on TiddlyDesktop was kind of, well, was going nowhere, really, because it's an endless race to build a better browser, or even a browser that's half as good as Chrome or Firefox. So the change is that within that last year, one round of work I've done on TiddlyDesktop has successfully got wiki folders working within it, which was always a goal, to make it as easy for end users to run the Node.js configuration of TiddlyWiki as it is for them to run the standalone single file version of TiddlyWiki. And that experience has led to me evolving a new approach, which is very simple. Basically, the current TiddlyDesktop code base, I intend to not put significant work in myself. I will continue to make it available. I'll continue to, well, I'm very slow at it, in fact, accidentally, but I will continue to process pull requests and so on for it. But instead, I'm going to switch my attention to a desktop application that is TiddlyWiki, that's capable of working with standalone files and wiki folders, but that exposes those wikis over HTTP so that you can edit them on any browser that you want to use. So technically what that means is that to work with TiddlyWiki in that situation, one would need to do 2 things. One would need to run TiddlyDesktop, and typically you would, I think, set that up to run at startup. And then it would just sit there, sitting in the system tray. And then you would open, to open a new wiki, you would navigate to it, and then you'd get a URL that you could then open in any of your browsers. And that URL would be something like 127.0.1/mywiki. You know, you get to choose what that URL looks like. So I think that that's the best use of my resource, because that's a thin layer, a desktop user interface layer around something that TiddlyWiki already does. It already, when it runs under Node.js, exposes wikis over HTTP so that you can connect to them with any browser. And that's really, yeah, so that's quite an attractive option for me, and it gets me off this endless and frustrating game of trying to play catch up on browser features. And as it happens, my favorite browser, for a whole number of reasons, is Safari. And I don't see any prospect of having native saving support within Safari. So I think this HTTP approach is the broadest approach we can take. Is anybody on the call actually a TiddlyDesktop user? It's probably a bit theoretical for you before going, if you're not.
I use it sometimes.
Okay, what do you prefer about it over the normal browser combination or what have you that you use?
No, I ultimately, yeah, I end up using Firefox now.
And that's because it's a better browser?
Yeah, because I've been using Firefox for such a long time. And
yeah, exactly. It's second nature, and one has all the extensions that one needs. Yeah. Nathan's saying in the sidebar uses TiddlyDesktop. Why do you use it, Nathan?
I mostly use it as a quick way to have a list of wikis that I can very rapidly switch between. That's something that is a little more tedious in the normal browser space.
That's something I appreciate as well. TiddlyDesktop does have, I can't remember what I put in it, it does, in the most recent version, I did add a system tray menu. Oh yeah, that's right. The system tray menu just has a setting, a menu item to take you back to the wiki list. But I always felt that it was up there in the system tray that we should list each wiki, and that selecting one should jump to my default browser with the correct URL.
I agree. That would be sort of ultimately convenient, and I think that plan is sort of a best of all worlds approach.
And I like the way that one of the things that we've learned, I think, is we've seen lots of people in the community who started out with a single file edition, and then after a certain amount of trepidation, experimented with the Node.js edition. And I think, for the most part, their feedback is that that transition was easier than expected. So I think by giving it a GUI, by giving the Node.js edition a GUI, so to speak, will make it look simpler, and that'll probably be just enough to help those last few people over the hurdle.
I think you're probably right there.
So this is particularly Matt Lauber asked this question, and I'm aware, Matt, that there are particularly desktop pull requests of yours that I haven't responded to, so forgive me for that. I guess, I phrased all of that as being about me. So if somebody else wants to take on TiddlyDesktop development, I would be absolutely delighted to support them. Everything I said is true, but it remains that actually aspects of TiddlyDesktop were really fun to work on. And it remains that there are things that you can do in a TiddlyDesktop type environment, that are unique to that environment. It's quite an interesting area for investigation. Oh, great. So Matthew Lauber, hello. Matt, how do you do? You may not have a microphone, but glad you could join us. Are you mic'd up, Matt? No, mic. Matt, am I pronouncing your name correctly as Lauber? Great. Matt, really pleased you could join us. I'm afraid you just missed me rather laboriously explaining the TiddlyDesktop situation, but it's roughly bored of being asked to make TiddlyDesktop a better desktop browser, so instead want to focus on wrapping a GUI around the Node.js edition of the configuration of TiddlyWiki so that people can use it with whatever browser. Oh, great, you were on the other side, Matt. Well, great. I mean, and as I was saying, I've seen your pull requests, and I'm really sorry I'm behind on so many things, which includes the TiddlyDesktop pull request, but I infer from that that you have a continued interest in TiddlyDesktop. I'd be very interested to know what your kind of use case is and whether you can see yourself doing more TiddlyDesktop development going forwards. Okay, so you're not particularly wedded to the capabilities of the current TiddlyDesktop app. You'd be just as interested in the reformulation that I described of a GUI wrapped around the Node.js edition. Great, yeah. Excellent. I mean, one of the things I quite like the idea of is being able to use it on a server, you know, in those situations, old-fashioned situations where you have a server that you remote desktop to or something. I think why wouldn't we encourage people to run the GUI wrapper, you know, just like they would with IIS, to make it as easy as possible to set up. Yes, and Matt makes points about making it separate from my normal browsing. I rather like that, but I get around that by using Firefox as my TiddlyWiki browser. So I guess all web developers run literally every browser. I have Opera for one set of work commitments and so on, where I've got one set of passwords, use Firefox for all my TiddlyWiki work, use Chrome for web development, and use Safari for browsing the web. Craziness, craziness. Anything else on TiddlyDesktop? Matt, I'm sorry you're not mic'd. I hope you'll be able to join us again with a microphone at some point. Okay, so what I was going to do now very quickly was demo the new toolbar feature. So this is context for this. At the end of January, we had Hangout 97, I think. We talked about how important it was to really focus on the last few features of TiddlyWiki that are still experimental and still need a bit of work to make them really usable by ordinary people. And so we talked about a bunch of things, both about the way the project is run and the functionality of the system, and a lot of that, a lot of the functionality that we've discussed is things like making the plugin library work better for third-party plugin libraries, making it easier for individual TiddlyWiki hackers to publish their plugins. So it's about extending the technology to underpin the community. And the big technical area that I'd identified that needs work is the multi-user story. So that's to say that right now, running TiddlyWiki on a server with 10 users is awkward and is not really optimized for that. And there's a use case that I'm very interested in, which is a small private group, 8 or 10 people, probably only 2 or 3 making regular updates, the rest of them more casual users who read the material from time to time. So that actually is all tied together with what we've just talked about, TiddlyDesktop. So back on the Hangout wiki, the tiddler called Better Multi-User Server talks about how we need to re-engineer the HTTP support, and then also blithely says we'll add a new desktop GUI. So that desktop GUI I'm conceiving as being part of that same initiative, if you like. So this me suddenly stopping all of that or deferring all of that in order to work on the editor toolbar was a bit unexpected. But the situation for some time has been that many people have asked for an editor toolbar, a toolbar with a nice bold button on it so that I don't need to remember TiddlyWiki's arcane syntax for making text bold. And the problem, I first looked at ways of implementing that very simple thing within TiddlyWiki 2.5, 3 years ago, so quite early on, before there was much traction. And I ran into a problem that is quite well understood, actually. It is that if you have some text selected in a text area, and then you click outside the text area, you lose that selection. So that means in the context of a button that's supposed to make the text bold, the user selects some text, presses the bold button, and that action removes the selection, so you no longer know which bits of text to make bold. Now, the standard solution to that problem is simply, when the text area detects that it has lost focus, to save the selection position somewhere, and then to use it when you're making the operation. The trouble for us is that with our refresh architecture, where we're not allowed to store state in the, well, we're not allowed to. If we store state in the DOM, it will be lost if there is a subsequent update, refresh update, that rebuilds that part of the widget tree. So that meant the standard approach to this losing focus problem wouldn't work within TiddlyWiki 5. So for the last 2 years or so, the status was, I thought we were blocked. I couldn't see a way to implement the feature easily. I was very pleased to see Steve Kimmel and several other people, I think, have explored similar territory to me and run into the same problem, and had started exploring solutions, which was helpful for me to sort of understand what workarounds there might be. But the big breakthrough for me was 2 or 3 weeks ago now. I was playing around with TiddlyWiki and suddenly realized the solution to the problem. So in fact, if I screen share, perhaps I can just illustrate what's going on. So if we go to tiddlywiki.com, so this is this doesn't include the toolbar, and I do an edit just to illustrate the first point I made. I select some text. Now let's pretend that that show preview button is the bold button. I press show preview and immediately I've lost the focus. But now the thing that I noticed was that if we have an HTML file embedded in TiddlyWiki, so let's make one. So we create a new tiddler type text HTML, and we'll put the text hello there in it. Now, here's an interesting thing. I select some text there, and now when I click on a separate button, in this case the toolbar button, the selection is retained. And if we do an inspect on it to see how that's actually built into the DOM, you can see that that HTML has been rendered in an iframe. And it is iframes that have this property, that basically the focus is maintained independently for each iframe. So that means when I make a selection here and then click outside, I'm now clicking in a separate frame. So there's a selection in this frame, and then independently there's a selection in there. So this this property of iframes is well known, in fact. And as soon as I made that observation, I remembered that 10 years ago or something, I remember that I think Gmail was one of several online services that wrapped text areas in iframes for exactly that reason. So having figured out that technical part of the problem, then implementing the toolbar was actually incredibly straightforward, and it's mostly been a matter of trying to get the kind of polish and details right, and trying to make it suitably extensible. So let's have a look at it. I edit a tiddler, and here's the toolbar. There's one element that's familiar from other TiddlyWiki toolbars, which is an arrow that's showing me the toolbar entries that don't fit, so to speak. And in the same way as the other toolbars, I can go to Appearance, Toolbars, Text Editor, see a complete list of all the toolbar buttons, and if I deselect a couple, then now back here you can see those buttons have disappeared from here, and they're now present in that drop down. The toolbar also incorporates the show preview button that we had before, so you click there to hide and show a preview of the current tiddler. This pre-release features the internals plugin that adds this select box and the ability to view the tiddler that you're editing in terms of not just the output, but its raw HTML and these internal representations, the parse tree and the widget tree. And sometimes looking at those can be useful to debug what's going on. So if I select a word, say, and press the bold button, you can see, and then maybe select a more appropriate preview, you can see that it's made the word this be bold. If I press the bold button again, it removes the bold of that word. And some of this stuff is the spit and polish that I was talking about, that we've had some very good feedback identifying slightly different behavior that is a bit quicker. If I put the cursor in a paragraph of text, I can make that paragraph be a heading, and I can change it to a different level heading.
That is really slick, by the way, just have to say.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad it's doing the biz. Here's a block quote, and you can have quite fun applying multiple types of formatting, a superscripted subscript, and then if you go back in the same order, you can unwind yourself. Oh, I haven't unwound myself.
A recent workshop on DesignWrite, Professor Steve demonstrated your Excise tool, which is really cool.
Yes, he keeps calling it Excise, which is a hilarious, hilarious thing. It's because I intended to call it Excise, and of course Incise and Excise, I think, probably in some sense mean opposite things. So yes, so far we've talked about these buttons up to the heading buttons, and they're the conventional toolbar buttons that one's familiar with from Microsoft Word. And that's really, I think, their value, is that for a user, when they see that toolbar, it's a signal that you don't need to panic, you know what to do, and it's a powerful crutch for users. But then along here are some more unusual tools. So the one that Hegart just mentioned, the Excision tool, allows you to select a body of text. So actually, I'm going to refresh just because I'd messed things up a bit. So now here we've got, please don't try to use it for anything important, which is kind of like a warning. So let's select that text, and then we'll choose to excise it. And so what that means is we're going to cut that text into a new tiddler, and we'll call it pre-release warning. And then we're going to replace the excised text with a transclusion that references that same tiddler. So when I perform the excision, there, my pre-release warning has vanished to be replaced by a transclusion. And if I look in recent changes, you can see there's my pre-release warning tiddler. So if I wanted to change the formatting, for instance, I could remove the bold and put strike through. I think that might be a bit of an unhelpful thing to do for our users, but there you go. So excision is exciting to me because it's extensible. So again, you can, for instance, you can excise to a macro call, to a custom macro call, so that you can do whatever you like with the excised text. And the excise tool itself is clonable. Anybody can copy the excise tool and make minor modifications so that it does something slightly different. It makes concrete something that I believe is very important, that TiddlyWiki's origin was as me exploring ways that we could change the user interface of wikis to make it easier to refactor the content. And so my entirely unoriginal idea is that the quality of a wiki is largely determined by the effort that people put into gardening it, as it's sometimes called, to continually modifying it and refactoring it to keep it up to date. And TiddlyWiki tries to support the refactoring process by allowing you to work on 2 tiddlers or more than 2 tiddlers at once, because TiddlyWiki
Yeah, and it's also reinforcing your philosophy of tiddlers, isn't it, to make them smaller and
Exactly.
and
It
reuse
supports the
stuff. Yeah.
process of taking a long chunk of text and gradually making it into a shorter chunk. So a kind of gradual chipping away process. And I think that reflects something about the way that we solve problems, really. You know, you start with a big thing, you chip away at it until it's a small thing. So I'm really pleased. I think that there's a bunch of important things that TiddlyWiki enabled before in terms of the user interface. So transclusion was something that was enabled by TiddlyWiki's design, but it wasn't really promoted or made easy for users or brought even particularly directly to their attention. So I really like the fact that this means even when I'm not there, even when people aren't watching the Hangouts, if they start going through these toolbar buttons, they'll come to the Excise toolbar button. They might not understand what it means, but they can experiment and learn what it means. And hopefully that will trigger in them the recognition of a different way of writing that they kind of discover for themselves by discovering the tool. So that's Excision. There's a not so interesting tool for adding images, so it just displays all of the images in the wiki and lets you add them. And again, care is taken when it's finished inserting the image, it's selected. So that means that if I insert a different one, it replaces that one that I just inserted. And we've got the stamp tool, which allows you to, with a single click, to pull in a pre-arranged snippet of text, not pre-arranged, pre-configured snippet of text. And you'll see there's a menu item, add your own. If I so this is my snippet. In the menu, we'll call it this is a snippet. And then here we'll go snip, 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 ooh, snippety snip. And now back in the editor, in my stamp menu, I've now got an option. This is a snippet, and selecting it just inserts that snippet at the cursor position. So these tools, and particularly the stamp tool, are starting to encourage users to customize their writing environment to support the process where they're actually typing. So, you know, there's some bits of writing in the context of TiddlyWiki that's actually around changing the tags on things, stringing things together in a different order. But there's a very literal, brutal sense of writing, which is where we're typing. And one of the things that is, I think, exciting about bringing in these automated tools is that when we type, we are kind of disincentivized to do things that require lots of typing. So I think in a general way, there are situations where we would, you know, if it was easier, we would do more refactoring. So it's a very simple observation that hopefully by making it easier, we can encourage more people to do it.
Jeremey,
We've been joined by Eric. Hello, Eric. Would you like to belatedly say hello and introduce yourself to the world?
Oh my God, I have been sitting here for 10 minutes watching your screencast asking somebody to please accept my camera. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry I'm late. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone knows me. I'm here. There.
Good to see you, Eric. And good that you're here with Paul. Paul was reminding us that he was actually responsible for introducing you to TiddlyWiki in the first place. So everybody in the community owes Paul a bit of a debt of gratitude as well.
It's all my fault.
Exactly. Just a question in the sidebar from Matt. Is this toolbar and the multiple preview output available in a plugin library somewhere? So the multiple preview output is in the pre-release. So the pre-release is at tiddlywiki.com/pre-release. The toolbar, there's a pre-release of it on TiddlySpot, and I posted the link to that in the agenda wiki. So the current plan is that the those multiple preview outputs, that's a plugin called internals. But the toolbar, there's discussion at the moment whether it should be packaged as a plugin or shipped as part of the core. Because I think it's an important feature for end users, for beginners, I'm very inclined to keep it in the core, but I think it's important that we, that we have a full discussion of that. And at the moment, I haven't finished the functionality, which gives us plenty of time. But let me, just before we close this section, oh, Eric's waving his hand.
Yes,
Eric.
I was playing around yesterday with the pre-release of the editing toolbar buttons. First, I want to say they very much, and I think I see a little bit of an echo from the Quick Edit Toolbar TiddlyTools stuff in some of the way it's architected. And what that got me to thinking was if some of my existing Quick Edit Toolbar buttons could be easily re-implemented as TiddlyWiki 5 editor toolbars. And, well, yes, clearly they can be, especially because I notice you have that nice little messaging to do a replace selection and a wrap selection and things, which is basically how I had written the Quick Edit Toolbar code before. Of course, that was DOM-based, so it was, not really portable over to TiddlyWiki 5, but now that you have that mechanism as a core message, implementing additional buttons is essentially implementing the interface part that constructs the appropriate message parameters. And so let me do a real quick screen share. Oh, it's not letting me share a screen here. It's listing none of them. That's really weird. Huh. All right.
Well, let me show you, while you're getting that ready, Eric.
Because I wrote a button I want to show you, but it's not letting me share any screens.
We had considerable problems with Google Hangouts earlier.
All right. Well, let me see if I can do a screen share at all. No, it's not letting me share screens at all. It's not listing. I hit screen share and it gives me an empty list. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, to react to the important part of the message is, of course you're right. So Quick Edit, Quick Edit demonstrated the demand for toolbar buttons during the editing process, I think. And of course, in Quick Edit, you did explore, I think, very much the same line of questioning. How can we support the special needs of people who are writing wiki text within a text box instead of normal word processing? I wanted to just very quickly show one last aspect of the toolbar work, which is that although we've just been looking at it in with a wiki text tiddler, it's important that it's type sensitive. So I intend to make it so that these same toolbar buttons will work with markdown tiddlers, but that will insert the correct formatting for markdown. Furthermore, we also have support for bitmap editing. Well, we've always had support for bitmap editing, but finally it's decent. So if I change the type to image, I get a different set of toolbar buttons. I can select the image size like that, and I can paint within it. Here I can select the paint color. Here I select the paint transparency, and if I make the brush much thicker, then it's clearer that how the transparency works. So if you have a stylus on a tablet, this is actually already quite fun. You can build up paint in a kind of interesting way to create interesting effects, and although it's a very minimal set of tools, they do the job. You can also clear the entire image to a blank background. Oh, I haven't done it right. But anyway, and the goal is to, just as we've got Eric and already, I think, I can't remember who it was, somebody in the group also published a toolbar button for the new system. Hopefully we'll have people writing bitmap plugins as well. So for instance, I don't know why anybody would want to apply photo filters, but you know, all those kinds of any bit of bitmap processing you've ever seen could be done. So I think this is a really great. It's both good that we have a better face to present to inexperienced new users, but it's really cool that we're enabling another kind of little environment within the ecosystem where it's really easy for people to create new stuff. So Eric has rejoined, so perhaps, do you want to try and screen share again, Eric?
I'm going to give it a try. Last time I did this, it actually messed up my Google, and Google Chrome crashed. So let's see. No, it's still not giving me a proper list. Uh-oh, something's wrong here. I can't screen share, but what I can do is go strictly old school here.
You can send me a URL if it's online.
No, I haven't put this up yet, but I can actually show you what I want to show very quickly if I can just get my screen set up a little bit here. All right, there we go. There's an old screen share. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here I made a toolbar button called Link.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take a look at what's in it, it's a button and a pop-up. The pop-up displays an edit field and then does a list of all tiddlers that match the input from the edit field. And then each item in the list is a link which does an edit operation which inserts the link text. Paul, your mic is open. So the result is that there's now a link button. I didn't bother to put graphics or any of the other things to make it look nice, but there's a link button, and when you click on it, you get a list of matching titles. And so if we put in something like TEST, there's our list of things that match TEST, and when I click on something like Brain Test Tools, the first one, if I click on it, there it is. It's been inserted as a link into the edit field. So that was a request yesterday from somebody on the group about having a way to pick an item from a list, a tiddler name from a list, and have it insert the link. So this shows how relatively easy it is to do. So there's the code. There's a pop-up. The pop-up part is a typical TiddlyWiki pop-up code, and then the real meat of it here is just this action send message right there.
There's a lot of boilerplate in there, isn't there?
Yeah, but the part that's really meaty here is the action send message, which does a edit text operation and does a replace selection, inserting in the desired text. So it's as easy as that. It's really, really easy. I love this. This is very nice. I plan on taking the rest of my quick edit buttons that you haven't done, like the color picker and things like that. They can all be easily implemented because all it needs is that message was the only part that is not just interface. The rest, this is the meat of the function. The rest of it's just the interface to get the right values for that function. So
excellent.
Nicely done, Jeremy.
Well, hello to Matt as well. Matt, hi. Would you like to introduce yourself if you're microphoned?
I hope I am. Can you hear me?
I am. Welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself and say hello to everybody?
Yes. So, yes, I'm Matt from Stockholm, Sweden. A long-time Tiddly user, and well, yeah, just enjoying everything about TiddlyWiki.
Indeed, one of the most prolific people in the community. I think you and Toby are up there. You just before we asked you to introduce yourself, you asked in the sidebar for a word on how people can create new buttons and to share them. So that is on my list, is to write the documentation for adding toolbar buttons. But as you've already seen, Eric, for instance, has had no difficulty reverse engineering it because basically they work in a very similar way to other buttons. So for TiddlyWiki internal people who are already used to how that stuff works, there's not too many surprises. There's a couple of new features a couple of differences to support the way that toolbar buttons have to be sensitive to the content type of the tiddler they're working on, but otherwise very straightforward. So then you can bundle as many toolbar buttons as you like in a toolbar. As many toolbar buttons as you like in a plugin, and you could arrange the plugin so that those toolbar buttons were hidden by default or were visible by default, and in either case the end user would be able to override that setting. And it's a class of sort of plugin collection that I hope we see a lot of. Exactly like Quick Edit is a bundle of those things. But as I said before, I'm also really interested in making it super easy for people themselves to create their own toolbar buttons. And so the stamp thing that you saw in the demo, you need to maybe see somebody else do it once. It's essentially no more complicated than doing a tiddler clone or something like that, because it's, you say you click add new snippet, and it just gives you a new tiddler that you finish off and press OK on. So I wanted to talk about the DesignWrite course. Very pleased that Matt is here. So without repeating too much what we said at the beginning, I've known Steve Schneider for a few years now. He's been working with TiddlyWiki since, I think, 2006, so since the very early days. He's always been a huge enthusiast for TiddlyWiki, and although he trained in humanities, he has become he's carved out an area of expertise around hypertext, and he's been using TiddlyWiki in the courses that he teaches at State University of New York. That's the right way around.
State University of New York.
Yes. And then at the beginning of this term, so January this year, we started a really ambitious new idea, which was to extend the course that Steve was already teaching to make it available to people online. So Steve doesn't like calling it a MOOC, which is it's basically an online course with multiple participants, but there is a whole kind of fashion for this kind of thing. But I've been really interested to see how it's evolved. My commitment to the course has been very small. Once a week I come together with Steve for a conversation that we do with students, the students who are there. So Steve's in a lecture room or something facing the students, and we have a discussion, and then I buzz off and they do some actual serious work. And a lot of the discussion has been of a sort that we never have on Hangouts, which is about how to name and categorize things. So it's a very this is my experience of what's new about working with Steve on this course, is it's causing me to look at my experience of TiddlyWiki through actually a very conventional lens, but a lens that I don't normally, that isn't my standard one. I didn't go to university, so I'm not steeped in the academic tradition, don't have much experience of academia as a way of getting things done, if indeed it even is a way of getting things done. So it's been really interesting for me to gradually see Steve successfully, I think, pull more structure out of our sort of joint discussions that have really helped me to see the landscape a bit more clearly. So we've run through, for instance, a very careful layered sequence of the components of TiddlyWiki. So we have this idea that you can introduce people to a tiddler, and that's a kind of self-contained concept. Then you can start to talk about links, then you can start to talk about tags, then you can start to talk about lists, filters, etc. So all these these half dozen things that make up TiddlyWiki. We believe that there is a stacking order for them, so to speak, where the ones higher up in the stack only depend on the concepts below. And so, to me, that's really interesting stuff. For the students, what's Steve, to my great surprise, is running an incredibly practical hands-on course. So there's enormous emphasis on the students building stuff and that being visible for everybody else to see. And you know, as I said, I don't have a background in academia, but we should recognize that that way of working is still very, very rare. You know, most people like to keep their work private, particularly whilst they're working on it. So in almost every dimension, I've found my experience of it to be, say, really fascinating. Particular reason for emphasizing it all today is that the course is coming back, and Hegart has had this experience of being a TiddlyWiki enthusiast and then going on the course. From watching Hegart's experience, I'm really wondering whether other people might really enjoy the experience too. So, for instance, Matt, just without wishing to pick on you, but you were looking at me, it might be a really interesting thing for you to consider. And of course, the great thing is Steve's been teaching TiddlyWiki for a few years. I'm sure he's going to continue, so it's not actually time sensitive, but it's a good time to think whether you could do the commitment in May. And certainly, I think, like all group activities, the amount that we're getting out of it is, in some sense, proportional to the number of people involved and, you know, their qualities and the difference in their perspective and so on. But anyway, I've waffled on. Hegart, please, would you like to start by just telling us why you decided to do the course, what you hoped you would get out of it, and how you think your whether what you've got out of it so far matches your expectation, and what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you should mention Matt in there. I'm actually just about to pinch some of Matt's code from his QuickTidd project and use it in one of my DesignWrite exercises, so that's really cool. Yeah, I've been using TiddlyWiki, as I say, since September last year. I started making use of it.
Sorry, Hegart, to interrupt.
For a personal project.
How did you discover it, and what were you using it for at first?
I've been using it initially for documenting my home network. I've been doing this project over many years now because I'm a network engineer by trade originally, and my home network is an absolute mess. You know, the same old story. A plumber, his home plumbing is the worst ever. Yeah. That type of thing.
Cobbler's children go barefoot. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yes.
So can you show us that wiki?
So I've been trying to document my own network. I can. I don't have that one up at the moment. No, it's my personal space one. I haven't got that ready to share yet, to be honest.
That's quite right. It's a lot to us to share things at short notice.
No, that's cool. It is actually a very basic. It didn't even have much in the way of transclusion. I've come from a MediaWiki background, and so a lot of what I did initially in those first few months of starting to use TiddlyWiki was trying to bang it into shape to make it work like MediaWiki. And that was so wrong. I can see that now.
Okay, so this is. I'm so sorry. The rest of us are hearing some choppiness, Hegart, when you're talking. But just to reflect back, what I think I heard, and it's such an interesting perspective, is that you were already experienced with MediaWiki. So you were already writing content for MediaWiki. You were familiar with MediaWiki's wikitext syntax, but also its way of organizing content. Then you found TiddlyWiki. Presumably, you were interested in the single file paradigm aspect of it, but then your first act was to wish it was more like MediaWiki, was I think what I heard.
Yeah, that's about right. Sorry about the choppiness. Welcome to the wonderful world of New Zealand communications. That's why I don't use video.
No, I've turned mine off in the hope, but we're hearing you, and the weather, internet weather, is apt to come and go. So maybe it'll get better in the next few minutes. You were, but I think I interrupted you. You're starting to. I heard something about transclusions. I think it was about. You were starting to talk about that line of thought about trying to make it like Wikipedia, and was it that you were going to, sorry, like MediaWiki, and perhaps you were going to say something about how transclusion is different in the two platforms.
Yeah, as I was starting out with TiddlyWiki, I tried to force it to do things the MediaWiki way, and that was since I've learnt in DesignWrite, that was probably not a good
Can you give us an
way of doing
example?
things. Yeah, with templates, for instance, classic example templates, your way of using templates is completely different to what I would have expected. I was trying to create a template that had places for content to be transcluded into the template, and I can't really describe it, but it's kind of back to front compared to the way that TiddlyWiki does things as opposed to MediaWiki. Yeah, it's completely different.
That's interesting. What was the context that you were working on MediaWiki before? Was it the same personal stuff, or was it just that you were a Wikipedia editor or something?
It was just no. I have been a Wikipedia editor, but mostly, once again, it comes back to this personal project of documenting my network. I started out trying to do this originally in Visio, even before Microsoft bought Visio.
I remember that era. Yes.
Yeah.
Visio
So,
was cool, and I was so excited about Visio then.
Yeah. Yeah. My home network documentation project has gone through multiple different incarnations over the years, and it wound up in MediaWiki for a while, and now it's moving on to TiddlyWiki. So that's what brought me here.
Okay, excellent. Well, sorry to kind of stop you while you were telling the story there. But so what? So you discovered TiddlyWiki. That kind of process of realizing you didn't need to make it be like MediaWiki, that was something that came from the course more than the weeks beforehand, where you were interacting with the community independently of the course. Was it?
Yeah, I think so. I tried kind of banging my head against TiddlyWiki for a while on my own, and I saw the opportunity mentioned in the discussion forums about this course, and I thought, yeah, that probably sounds like me.
And what do you think made it easier for you to learn and get involved in the with the structure that Steve set up in the course versus the way that you were doing things before?
Well, okay, having been diagnosed with Asperger's, I tend to work in a very structured, organized, methodical way, and that is something which has really come out in the DesignWrite course, is the structure and the organized step-by-step, and I've found that really helpful.
That's interesting. Okay. So do you think that as an Asperger's sufferer, if that's a polite way to put it, do you think that you can use TiddlyWiki to help you deal with the effects? Is that, or am I putting words in your mouth? Or that it reflects the side of your character that sort of emerges from the condition? Sorry, these are very personal questions.
Yeah, I'd say so. No, that's fine. That's fine. No problem at all. Yeah, I'd say so. It is just this whole methodology, and actually a methodological approach, which is definitely born of Asperger's as well. Yeah, in fact, you'll find a lot of people working in Silicon Valley, hello Eric, have Asperger's as well, apparently.
Yes, no, indeed. I mean, I worked in mostly in London. I mean, mostly in England. But yes, I've worked with many people with Asperger's and related conditions. And it's one of the things I think that's interesting about our profession, really, is that it's absolutely clear that there is room in software engineering for all different types of people, and I don't think that's necessarily as true in every profession or in every culture. But I'm very interested to, I don't want to push you into personal territory, but I'm interested, you know, how one of the things I talk about with TiddlyWiki is the feeling that I have that has been reflected back to me by a number of other people, that TiddlyWiki reflects the way that people think that their own brains work. So I don't mean for a moment it does in any kind of neurological sense, but that the pictures that we paint ourselves in order to understand the operation of our own brain, the stories that we tell ourselves, map quite well onto TiddlyWiki for me and for some people. And this, one of the things that I've learned from Steve's course is how that in turn is an extension of a very long-seated part of the hypertext philosophy, which is now 50 years old, which is this idea of augmenting the human intellect. And so for me, that's about...
It's interesting.
I mean, sorry, I've probably gone on about this before, but it's really obvious what we are. You know, as humans, we evolved in a very particular place at a very particular time to survive in a very particular context, and most of our capabilities and our weaknesses and so on stem from that. That we're savanna animals. We grew up in a two-dimensional plane. Our brains are optimized for two-dimensional navigation, are terrible at three-dimensional navigation. You know, we are what we are, and our brains were built for a different world than that which we now encounter, than which we now inhabit. Personally, I think that our brains are sufficiently complex because they evolved, you know, they've obviously evolved to cope with social structures, social interactions, and that's what's, if all our brains could do was keep us alive on, you know, in the savannah, then I don't think you would see everything that, you know, anyway. Going off into neurological speculation, but the central idea is this repeated feedback that I get from other people that they see TiddlyWiki as reflecting the way that their brain works, and that encourages me to think that for some people it can feel like a very closely fitting exoskeleton. So both in the sense there's something that's already fits their brain, but also is malleable and changeable to that's precisely wrapped around the individual needs of the user. And that, for me, is, you know, takes me straight out of the realm of neurology and into the realm of politics. That I think it's really powerful to be able to serve the individual. You know, humanity is 7 billion strong. We're all the same, but we're all different. And open source in general, and TiddlyWiki in particular, gives us a way of creating a product that can be different for each of the people that use it, and, you know, map to their unique needs.
There are two different definitions for the word personal. One of them is just one-to-one ratio with a human being, personal, like a personal computer, something that they use alone rather than with a group. But the other personal is intimate, and yeah, TiddlyWiki is changing how we work with computers, and we get more intimate with the data when we can manipulate it with these tools that are more flexible and more direct. You know, I don't know. I mean, what I'm headed at is I think that TiddlyWiki is going a long way to actually implementing personal computing, whereas before we were just doing lip service to the words.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, you know, I feel very strongly that this the way that you can use TiddlyWiki without needing a server leads to some important social consequences, and in particular, most of the population do on the internet is done on land that they don't own. And that's really very problematical for me. The idea that we live in everybody's committing all of their thoughts, their private relationship, personal stuff to, say, Facebook, that has no obligation or incentive to preserve or,
even if you're
respect that information.
Yeah, even if you're using a service that's represented to be one that's private, say like Google Keep, you're still sharing it with Google.
And to me, the problem with using Google Keep is it's clearly not core to Google. So and it's you know it's going to die. And if you look at it in terms of the next 20 years or the next 30 years, you guarantee it's going to die.
I like that it's there, but I don't count on it.
No, and I must say I'm quite interested in the great thing about services like Google Keep and Twitter and so on is that they are ubiquitous. They're there all the time, and I'm sure we discussed this before, but a way of creating new tiddlers that I'm quite interested in is for me to be able to tweet a new tiddler. So tweet some magical incantation that a robot that I control then reads and makes a modification to my TiddlyWiki in response to what I tweeted. So just in the same way as you can create a Tumblr blog by emailing it. But the point is to take advantage of the fact that to get stuff in there, to put 4 words out there so that the rest of you can read them and the conversation can continue, Twitter, etc., is a wonderfully direct and universal way of doing that. And obviously getting comments from other people, that kind of thing, getting involvement from people who aren't in the Tiddlyverse. So let's just think for a second where we are.
So what is the iframe issue that you...
Okay, I've got a screen share going here.
Oh, great. Okay, please go ahead. So this looks like your... Yeah. Okay, so I've seen this. This is your weekly diary.
Yeah, it's my main DesignWrite TiddlyWiki, and I keep all of my exercises in here. Either that, or I have links to the external TiddlyWikis of individual exercises. So if I go into here, these are all the exercises. Professor Steve has got them grouped on his main DesignWrite TiddlyWiki, so I've grouped them the same. If you have a look, for instance, sorry, it's a bit slow. Whoops. Let's have a go again. Sorry, doing this one-handed holding a microphone, it's a bit awkward. This one here, for instance, wiki words, photos, and tags. This was an internal exercise which I've kept within the scope of this particular TiddlyWiki. But you'll see there I've got a link to the original courseware on the DesignWrite wiki itself. Here we're using IFTTT, which I hadn't actually come across before. It says if this then that, and I'm saying if we add something to Pinterest, then copy it to Dropbox, and from there I can create a .tid file and import it directly into my TiddlyWiki, which has been really interesting.
It's funny you had mentioned the IFTTT. I was going to bring that up to Jeremy.
Yes, it's a great service.
Yeah, that's what that could possibly implement your or be part of implementing your tweet to Tiddler concept.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
And it's the best kind of solution to that kind of problem because it's such a glorious open-ended one that's created its own ecosystem. I mean, if this then that has been around, I think, for more than 5 years, and I'd been away for a bit, but it just seems to have got a bit. It's maturing very nicely, that platform.
It works quite well. I have 3 or 4 magic things that happen just automatically by IFTTT that I never worry about. They just happen. Anyway, I interjected. Go on. Sorry.
Hegart, yeah, please.
Yeah, I guess DesignWrite design. DesignWrite and hypertext. So if I click on this here, should open a new.
We are, Hegart, getting a lot of choppiness again, maddeningly. Didn't quite hear that.
Sorry.
And sometimes we're losing you entirely, which is a very bad sign. Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing a pretty clear video from you.
Yeah, the video is fine. It's just every so often you're dropping out and then getting choppy.
So it may be something that's audio related. Maybe just get closer to the microphone. I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah.
No, it's
Yeah,
really bad.
Which is a new project that I'm working on, which is the project. Now, talking about mapping our brains for this is how
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Hegart. We get the audio problems catastrophic all of a sudden. But if we hold, you're working here with. Are you working with Matt on this? Isn't there somebody else in the community you've been working with?
working with one of my fellow DesignWrite students.
Okay, I didn't quite get that, but so here I'm going to talk for you, Hegart, because we didn't quite get it. This is your planning for this Tiddly CRM project, which my understanding is this is an attempt to build within TiddlyWiki a kind of lightweight CRM system. This is something that I've talked about before. I think it's a classic application for TiddlyWiki. It's one of those things that you could do it in a spreadsheet, but as you did it in a spreadsheet, it would become really obvious that a spreadsheet wasn't the right tool, whereas TiddlyWiki feels like a really natural tool for doing it. So I can see here that you're starting to pan out, to map out the TiddlyWiki features that you want to be able to use. So we're, for instance, seeing plans to use Felix's Tiddly Map and Tobias's Make plugin. That's great. Love to see the fecundity generated by the ecosystem. Oh, so Matt, you're not seeing Hegart's screen. I've got Hegart's screen highlighted, so it should be. In the broadcast, you can do the same thing. In fact, if you click on his box, then it should become bigger. So now what I'm seeing here, and Hegart, you should continue to try to speak just in case it can work, but it looks like you're actually mapping out the functionality to quite a level of detail, that you're identifying the tiddlers that you expect to change. So this reflects, I think, one of the interesting techniques that Steve has been evolving within the course. So what he's been doing is having students create their first bit of hypertext within Excel, and then they export the individual rows of the spreadsheet to become individual tiddlers. And it's a very interesting exercise, I think. I love the way that it forces people to consider the differences between spreadsheets and TiddlyWiki. And I'm wondering here, where what I'm seeing you doing here, Hegart, is mapping things out not in a spreadsheet but in a mind map. But it seems like it's part of the same kind of process of fairly careful design work, really, before you start building stuff.
Yes, indeed. If you notice the red arrows there in FreeMind, they're actually live links, and I can click that, and it will take me to Tobias's Make plugin, for instance.
So this is your bookmark location for all the things that you need to remember.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So one thing I wanted to say about this, about CRM, is I've been, through my day job work, I've been involved on the very fringes of a movement that's been going on for about 10 years that's called VRM, for Vendor Relationship Management. And VRM is an attempt to do basically the same thing, but inside out. So instead of a tool to help a vendor manage their relationship with multiple customers, VRM is a tool, or a set of tools, or an infrastructure to help an individual manage their relationship with multiple vendors. And the VRM community, they believe that by adopting the word that riffs off of CRM, that they make this idea accessible, but that actually it's really revolutionary, and that when big companies do CRM, what they're actually doing is the sort of late 20th century brute force thing. And if we move to VRM, so under a classic VRM thing is that we have absurdly transplanted some of the inconveniences of shopping in the physical world onto the internet. So if I want to buy a new hammock for my hammock stand, I literally need to go around all the websites that might have it. I need to learn how to navigate those websites and find the right department and determine whether they've got the hammock that I want and whether the price is right. And the VRM people say, this is bonkers. Instead, what I should be able to do is to stick a poll up into the air that says, I'm Jeremy, I live in Oxford, I want a hammock. And then anybody on the planet who's capable of providing me a hammock should be able to bid to provide me that business. So, and if you think about it, of course it should be that way around. Of course, I ought to be able to say, I need some potatoes, and then if there's a lorry passing that can drop off potatoes at a marginal cost of 4p, they ought to be able to take advantage of that signal from me. So, I didn't mean to kind of deflect
Jeremy? Jeremy, I think that Paul has his microphone on. Maybe you could switch it off for him.
I actually mic'd up.
Oh! Paul, I'm so sorry. I then ended up meeting you while you were in the middle of talking. Apologies. Okay, and so now I can see Hegart showing us Trello. So who's AM?
This is our collaborative area. We're currently working on the TW project. I'd like to point out one thing here is that my co-conspirator has actually...
Once again, Hegart, we lost you again. The weather's suddenly turned bad. That was, I'm afraid, that was incomprehensible. Try again, Hegart, just to see if it's cleared up of its own accord.
Okay. Yeah,
no, we're still a bit broken, I think.
No.
No, I'm so sorry. But I think what I'm seeing here is evidence of a seriousness of planning that's rather exciting. It seems as though you've got a high degree of determination on this project. I'll be very interested to see how it pans out. But I think we, anyway, should be drawing to a close. So, Hegart, I hope that you'll be able to join us again on a future Hangout. If you do figure out whether it's your network connection or something that we can fix, then that would be great, because obviously it was a bit frustrating to not be able to see the demo properly. But hopefully that slightly chaotic demo will still have shown people that Hegart is getting an enormous amount from the DesignWrite course. So I think for anybody who's listening to this broadcast, anybody who's interested in TiddlyWiki and wants to learn more about the historical context of TiddlyWiki, learn more about how TiddlyWiki emerged from the sea of other similar projects in the past, and get an amazing opportunity to see people like Hegart doing very, very creative things with TiddlyWiki, then I would highly recommend the course. So any thoughts on DesignWrite or any of the stuff that we've seen there? Slightly frustrating, shortened demo.
There are a couple of single-page HTML template websites, which we see. I mean, websites are becoming more single-page template-ish thing, and I believe TiddlyWiki could very well marry into that space as well, and we could have editions based on different type of, which is what I thought was TW CRM also could be. So that's what I thought it was initially.
Well, it's both me and Mario have been doing a bit of work on the making TiddlyWiki generate a static but traditional what's the word, segmented website. You know, so those very classic websites where you get one block with one background color, another block with another background color.
Right.
And as you say, those are now become an almost universal part of the language of the web. And I like the idea of having those as output. There's something you export from TiddlyWiki. So you construct, you know, one constructs one's argument, one's arrangement of all of the facts and so on, and then there's some excerpt that gets exported for a particular audience. So I hope to do that with TiddlyWiki. So with tiddlywiki.com, the plan is that when you go to tiddlywiki.com, instead of getting to a TiddlyWiki, you will get to a lightweight, small HTML page with that, you know, structure of vertical chunks being different colors that will explain TiddlyWiki and provide pointers to the various starting points like the dev wiki and so on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Matt just asked a question about the toolbar being in the core or in a plugin, and then raises the question, can something be in the standard distro but removable, and or what about multiple editions? So annoyingly, this is a nomenclature problem, and the reason why it's annoying is because, you know, yet again, words and their meanings get in the way and make it harder to explain things. But in TiddlyWiki, the core has this very precise meaning, that the core is a plugin called $:/core that contains a bunch of shadow tiddlers that comprises the core. So we can't change that definition. Something that we can change, though, is that at the moment empty.html, which is the standard starting point for the vanilla TiddlyWiki, is literally empty. It has no plugins in it, but it could. So I think when people talk about the distribution of TiddlyWiki, what we're really talking about there isn't the core. We're talking about empty.html. And to be clear, we're talking about empty.html and the other editions, because empty.html is just one of the standard editions that we make available for TiddlyWiki. So we've got one decision, is should the rich text editor go in the core plugin or not, or in a separate plugin? If we decide to put it in a separate plugin, then we will have the opportunity to decide which editions would benefit from shipping with that plugin as standard. I still think that it needs to go into the core because it's so important for our broad base of new users, and we hope that TiddlyWiki will continue to grow, so we need to optimize the experience for new users. And the only negative impact I can see is in terms of the size of the core, but then I think what we should do about that is work to reduce the size of the core, not by cutting things out wholesale, but by making a list of things that we can do that would improve the size of the core and then working our way through it. And we've never done that. At no time during the development of TiddlyWiki 5 has the size of the core plugin been any kind of objective for me. So therefore, that's why I think if we're going to start, it's fair enough for us to start worrying about the size of the core, but I'm very confident that we can reduce the size of the core up to 50%, probably more, depending on what we choose to do. If we minify it, we know that we will be able to reduce it to a biggish fraction of its current size. Alex is saying, I'd have it as a plugin so you can choose to take it out, but the standard edition has the plugin installed. So that's the same as Matt asked. It's not part of the core, but it is part of the standard distribution. My problem with that is that still means that for beginner users, in order to reliably be able to use the toolbar, they need to understand plugins. And I think that's a problem. That obviously we want all users to understand how to install plugins, because it's where the magic comes with TiddlyWiki, all these fun extensions that you can make. But we don't want to make installing a plugin being a prerequisite before you can make a block of text bold.
So Jeremy, couldn't the empty.html ship with one or two plugins installed and activated?
Yes, so that's the proposal on the table, and my concern with it though is that even that when you ship empty, let me just. I guess a lot depends on whether you think that it's okay to have empty.html not being empty.
Right.
So
yeah.
There's some subtleties here. So there's obviously no problem with if the toolbar was a plugin, we could have an edition called TiddlyWiki plus toolbar that was the core plus that plugin. It being in empty is kind of problematic. It breaks something that we've had forever.
So I have a proposal, because I've seen empty has been used for two different things by two different categories of people. First is the category of people that need something to start from to start a brand new TiddlyWiki that they're going to fill in with a bunch of little tiddlers. And the other one is somebody who's a TiddlyWiki expert who's going to then take an empty as a baseline to bring in a whole boatload of tiddlers and migrate something to the latest version. So you might want to have an empty that really is empty and a starter that's differentiated from the empty.
But the problem is, so yes, of course we can do that. But another problem is that we're stuck with the URLs that we've got. So tiddlywiki.com/index.html, tiddlywiki.com/empty.html. There's many occurrences of those. Now, I am proposing to break tiddlywiki.com/index.html because I'm proposing that become not a TiddlyWiki.
Right.
But I don't think that's a problem, because I think it's the empty.html distribution point that's important. So now you could imagine keeping empty.html completely empty, having another edition that's got the toolbar plugin, and then promoting that edition as the one that people should download to get started. But you've got to see that in doing everything that I've described is unbelievable complexity that potentially stands between a user and being able to select text and press a button marked bold. And so that's what's problematical for me. So even though we can spin ourselves arbitrarily complicated, involved, approach that satisfies many needs, We've got this brutal thing at the front that we need to keep the new user experience good. And as I say, if a new user needs to be thinking, what have I got here? What's in it? That's kind of a failure, you know, because it's what the editions are about is vertical applications of TiddlyWiki. Here's an edition for doing resumes, for instance. So editions shouldn't be defined in terms of the plugin functionality that they provide, because that's what plugins do. It's editions are starting points. So
Right.
it gets, you know, I mean, I think we're all correct. In one sense, it's not a problem, because everything that I'm pointing to as being problematic is of our own construction, and we can arbitrarily change. So a lot of what you're seeing here is Jeremy's standard, oft-repeated concern about backwards compatibility. So, you know, that comes from bitter experience, really, of changing, sometimes feeling that I've changed the wrong things, made things harder for other people, and regretted it. So and particularly if I make work for myself by breaking backwards compatibility, that's an even worse outcome. So to me at the moment, it seems like the safest option is for the plugin to remain an intrinsic part of the core. I say remain because that's how I've implemented it at the moment. And to deal with concerns about the ballooning size of the core by analyzing ways to reduce the size of the core. But you know, we've done some work already on this. The number of tiddlers in the core, the fact that there's 100 and something additional shadow tiddlers to support the toolbar, that makes very little difference to the performance. So I mean, we need to be very clear about why we think, if we think that the ballooning size of the core is a problem, we need to be very clear about exactly why it's a problem. In what circumstances does that cause us problems? How would we measure whether we've fixed it? That kind of thing.
Jeremy? I don't recall who it was, but some weeks or perhaps even months ago, somebody was talking about using TiddlyWiki's core engine, but they didn't want any of the interface. And of course, your response was, well, you can take over the page template and make it look however you want. But for that person, none of the interface elements, like the toolbar, would be of any use whatsoever. Now, I'm not advocating that as the de facto distribution, but what could we do to address that, which is where people want the core engine. They want to have a tiddler database, essentially, but they don't really need the interface because they're going to put their own layer on. And that's not a popular.
So we have occasional requests to split the core up, and I've never been persuaded by them, because the configuration management complexities of having multiple versions of the core consistently outweighs those needs, I believe. You know, we've got to. It's important that TiddlyWiki serves the needs of everybody in the community, however diverse their needs are. But we mustn't compromise TiddlyWiki to serve the needs of a small number of users, really. And so these kinds of, you know, the example you've raised of there are editing components in TiddlyWiki, they're taking up weight, I'd like you to remove them, please, Jeremy. People have no idea of the complexity involved in doing that very simple sounding thing, because you've got to identify all the components that you've got to pull out. You've got to suddenly start testing two configurations then. You've got to, every single further change, I've got to test with the basic core and with the core that also includes these optional editing features. So it's a nightmare. We're not going there. The unit of modularity within TiddlyWiki is a plugin. The core is a plugin, just like all the other plugins that we use to extend it. We will evolve what is part of the core, but this basic idea that there is a single common core that everybody uses is really important, because it's that makes this be a single community that can share resources, you know, because we all have that core in common. Alex points out, yes, it's very important to be able to hide it. I mean, lots of people, I think, may not like it. I mean, if you're comfortable typing and remembering, there's no question that it's quicker to type stuff than to move the mouse around and click and drag. So yeah, and parenthetically, I would like to add keyboard shortcuts so that in a consistent way, every toolbar button can be summoned with a key. And yes, Alex, for you then, Alex is saying in the sidebar the most useful thing is the excise function, and I completely get that it's that distinction we talked about before. There's those first dozen or whatever it is, the formatting toolbar buttons. They're important for beginners. They're probably not going to be that important for any of you on this call because you all know instinctively, I think, by now how to format bold text in TiddlyWiki. But that last section where, like the excise tool, we're doing things that there isn't an easy alternative way to do, yeah, gets much more interesting.
Yeah, global search and replace seems to be something I keep go back to is something I'd like to see happen.
Well, global search and replace is, but let's come back to that. So search and replace within a tiddler, I think we need to do as part of the toolbar. So it's a really obvious basic thing while you're editing a tiddler, just within the context of that tiddler. I think search and replace very useful. Search and replace across the wiki as a whole. The complexity there is how do you review and accept changes. So my plan is to do search and replace like import, that when I do a search and replace, it will create an import record with a prospective import of all of those modified tiddlers, which I can then individually review and accept or reject. Then Matt's asking a very good question. Would it be simple, as a Matt Lauber, would it be simple enough for someone that was concerned about cutting things out to edit the core plugin, repack it themselves, and use the customized core in place of the standard core? So yes, absolutely, and I would love to see, every time we've discussed this in the past, I always end by saying I'd really encourage experimentation. You know, don't come in with a proposal that says the world would be better if we cut the toolbar editor out. Come in with, I ran this experiment and I got this really interesting result, and you know, that starts to get interesting. The added Matt Goldman, the added complexity from removing parts, doesn't this talk for an absolutely minimal core and then everything else is plugins? Matt, that happens at a different level. So the boot kernel is the absolute minimum thing that would get TiddlyWiki up onto its legs. And then, so that's defined in terms of, it's defined by its minimal outline, if you see what I mean. The core is not defined like that, and if you stop to think about it, you'll realize immediately that it couldn't be. That if we tried to make the core be minimal, there's just, you know, think about how TiddlyWiki works. A really minimal core wouldn't even have a page template in. You know, it would be, so the idea is that the core, what the boundaries of the core is that which is universally or near universally useful. And so, you know, when we think of the toolbar, we might well say that the toolbar isn't useful to some people, but really, who? Because it's useful to beginners. We're hearing from Alex that even for people who understand formatting and so on, the Excise tool takes them somewhere new, extends their capabilities with something they didn't get before. So I don't really buy that there's a big set of people who don't want the toolbar. I think it's pretty near universal.
Yeah, I agree that personally I like the toolbar, but the thing is, I won't use every tool in that toolbar, and I think everyone feels the same, but with different tools.
But you switch off the ones that you don't want, yeah.
Oh, you can do that then.
Yeah, just like every other toolbar. So there's checkboxes to independently enable and disable the toolbar button.
Okay.
So I think what we're here getting at actually is an important distinction. I was almost exclusively talking about a kind of internal plumbing point about what's in this, you know, the boundary of the core. and I think maybe we're talking more about the user experience, as in I want to be able to use TiddlyWiki without seeing this confusing toolbar. And absolutely clear that we do need to support that, because that's I just said I don't think there are very many people for whom the toolbar is not important, but for those people it is important that we have an answer, and that is to be able to disable the toolbar entirely. And I think if people are using fancy external editor, I can think of quite a few edge cases where basically you wouldn't be using the toolbar if you were using something better. Or you wouldn't be using the toolbar if you were doing a lot of your editing in your preferred text editor under Node.js. So,
Jeremy, my only issue is that if I recall correctly, you said the toolbar is actually going to be part of the edit text widget. Is that correct?
Sort of. Certainly, part of the implementation is there. It's not exactly that.
Because that's where the one thing I would like to see the toolbar done as a separate widget, so that it can be
okay. So how the toolbar is
the same
done,
customizations as other layout issues.
How the toolbar is architected is interesting. So the reason why I've had to modify the edit widget is to do two things. A, to allow it to cause it to respond to the editing messages that we referred to earlier. But also to make it, previously the edit text widget ignored its content, so anything between the opening edit text tag and the closing one was ignored. Now that content is rendered as the toolbar. So the toolbar, the entire toolbar that you see, is just bog standard wiki text. It's that wiki text that's stuck in the middle of the edit text widget. What the edit text widget does that is new is arrange the DOM so that messages emitted by widgets within the toolbar get directed at the text area, even though in the DOM layout the text area is actually adjacent to the toolbar rather than in between it. So in other words, what we've modified about the edit text widget is the ability to support text editing operations via messages and the ability to host content. And then entirely separately, within the core plugin, we've got a whole load of shadow tiddlers that make a toolbar for insertion that is then displayed within the edit text widget. So the edit bitmap widget does the same thing. So other edit widgets that want to support the toolbar architecture will need to render the content that they contain in the same way. But we can entirely general mechanism. And Alex just pointing out something that has also been discussed, is that we've got wiki text editing, talked about editing markdown, adding markdown, and bitmap editing. It would be really cool to add SVG editing. A full-blown SVG editor, can be a very complicated thing, but I do think there might be scope for a very simple SVG scribble editor. So one that doesn't do shapes, rectangles, and boxes and so on, but just allows you to scribble a path and delete it if you want to remove it, but doesn't even allow you, you know how normally in SVG tools you can select a path and then move the control points of the path? It strikes me one could avoid all of that and just literally make a diagram as a collection of paths, freehand paths, click on them to delete them. And all of the reason why I propose that is because I recognize that one of the important use cases for drawing within TiddlyWiki is annotation, and being able to do lightweight annotations in SVG would be quite attractive. So guys, I'm really sorry we've overrun, but then I started really late, so I'm pleased that we made up the time. As usual, it's been a great discussion. I love starting an agenda with 2.5 items and then finding that it takes us 2.5 hours. It's great. And the discussion has taken in a lot of interesting points. So as usual, I'm very grateful to you all. I'm sorry to see that we seem to have still lost Hegart. And Alex, I'm sorry we've not had a chance to hear from you properly. You may have noticed this was TiddlyWiki Hangout 99, so the next one is going to be our 100th Hangout. I haven't yet, well, I've only just sort of realized that, but we need to figure out what we're going to do. Maybe we should do something slightly different for the 100th Hangout. So we maybe one idea is we might do a marathon. So you remember for the 10th anniversary thing, we did an 8-hour hangout. So maybe we'll do something like that. But anyway, try and do that in the next week or two. So it won't be that special. It won't be that much preparation time. So before I close and say thank you, any comments or thoughts from anybody else? Oh, Alex is making an interesting thought, which is real-life meetups. So we could do the 100th Hangout in person somewhere. We need to take that discussion offline, but yeah, definitely pitch your proposal to the group, Alex. I think it's something we did talk about actually for the anniversary hangout, was the idea of having a couple of people there in person. So yeah, let's try for that. It'd be really cool. Any other thoughts, comments from anybody?
Jeremy, I know we're on closing here, but I just wanted to throw this out for you to think about. I had another thought as to what could be done with the internals of the edit text widget, and of course it's too late now, you've already done stuff with it, but I was kind of wanting to have it work like action widgets on a button so that you could hit the enter key in an edit field and have it do an action as a result of the input. Yeah. Because that's a very common thing people want to do, type something in, hit enter, and having to hunt down that little button next to it just for that purpose, so I was hoping that the internal of the edit text could be sort of like the body of a button, just with a bunch of action widgets.
Yes, well, you're probably beginning to see why the action widget mechanism just wouldn't really be rich enough for that at the moment. But the message mechanism is absolutely perfect. I mean, we've literally, to do the toolbar editing, the only new mechanism that's been introduced is this blessed iframe for remembering the selection. Everything else is bog standard stuff that TiddlyWiki has always done, which I think is good. So Alex is talking about conference, couple of days, Europe. Yeah, this is, we talked about this last summer. Sylvain managed to get together Tiddly Camp Paris at the beginning of June last year. It's a great opportunity to do something here. And I think Jed and a few others have indicated that they might be able to come over. And I know that Matt Goldman knows the way to the UK. So remains for me to say thank you very much to everybody, very much for your time. Much appreciate it. And I wish I had a swimming pool, wouldn't that be great? Much appreciate your time. Really interesting discussion. Sorry that we didn't cover everything. Sorry that we didn't have enough time to even talk to everybody about everything. But this, don't forget, is one long ongoing conversation, and it will continue next time. But everybody,
Jeremy, I have one last question. What are those two white things on the shelf behind you?
Yes.
Those are. Hang on, I can pull one down and show you. It's a candle. So
Okay.
there's a china top. Inside is a tea light, and then when you light it, it lights up from inside with a glow, and you may be able to see that there is a relief pattern on it, and so that makes it shine in a fascinating way. There you go, Jeremy's top lighting tips.
Hey, Jeremy, as you were mentioning, you come with this 100th meetup coming up next and all that. It's probably been said before, but like, kudos, dude. I mean, you have put shoulder to turning TiddlyWiki not only into a technology but into a community, and that's just incredible.
Well,
so, well done.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Well done.
I mean, it's really, if you're sitting here, On the contrary, the thing that seems remarkable is all of you. I mean, I'm just doing what I always bloody do, potter about with computers and write code. But it's all of you who have gathered together in a purposeful way to make TiddlyWiki much more than it could be if it was just me. So thank you.
Well, you seem to provide that center spine to the entire organization or whatever, and certainly appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I think if I've learned one thing, it's dogged persistence. Just keep going. If in doubt, write more code. Fix more bugs. Guys, thank you very much. So we're going to say goodbye to the audience, and then we'll still be online for a second. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye.